Okay, this video is about minor seventh chords. It's the last of the seventh chords we're going to cover before we get back to our song She Loves You by the Beatles. Minor seventh chords are easy to build, especially since we've already been through the major and dominant seventh chords. And the only trick with them is the notation for them, and I'll go over that. So let's get started on minor seventh chords. How do we build minor seventh chords? Well, minor seventh chords are a minor triad, or just a minor chord, with a flatted seventh on top. Some people will call this a minor seventh, but I'm avoiding that term and I'll explain why. So a minor triad with a flatted seventh on top. So let's take C as our example. I always like to use that. So if we wanted to build a C minor seventh, how would we do it? We'd make a minor C and then we'd add a flatted seventh. What does that look like? Well, remember how to make a minor. You start with a major, and C major by now we've memorized is just C, E, and G. Then to make it minor, you drop the middle note here a half step. So it becomes C, E flat, and G. That's C minor. Then we want to add a flatted seventh to that, and that will be our minor seventh. Well, the seventh note of the scale, remember, is B natural. And the easy way to remember that is just go up an octave and come down a half step, because the seventh note of a scale is always a half step below the starting note, and that's how you get that final sound of, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So you go from C up to C, come down a half step. That's the seventh note. We don't want that. We want the flatted seventh. So we drop that a half step. So the last note becomes a B flat in this case. So we've got a C minor chord, which is C, E flat, and G, with the flatted seventh on top. That's B flat, and that's the chord. C, E flat, G, and B flat. So let me just play it so you can hear it. Okay, I generally refer to this note as the flatted seventh. Most music books and music theorists will call this a minor seventh. I tend to avoid that because I like to reserve the term minor for the third so we don't get confused. So I just call that a flatted seventh. But there's an interesting way to look at this because we have to notate it, and it's a little bit confusing here. I've noticed that people get confused with the minor seventh notation. Here's what it looks like on a chord sheet. It's either going to be a C with a little dash, like a minus sign for minor, and then a 7. Or I think more commonly what I see is like a C with a small m, 7. So that means C minor 7. The problem with that is it's not really complete, because if you apply the little m to the C, that means a C minor, and then you're not positive what to do with the 7, what kind of seventh. Or if you apply the M to the 7, then that doesn't leave anything for the C, and it kind of looks like a C major. It's just a little bit confusing, but a lot of people will tell you that when you see this symbology, the minor applies both directions. So it applies to the C and it applies to the 7th. So you play a C minor and a minor 7th. And that's fine. That works. But if you look at the construction of a C dominant 7th, what you'll notice is that, remember the symbology for the C dominant 7 is just a C with a 7 next to it. Because the C doesn't have anything, we assume it's a major. It's like the big M was there. You can just pretend that. And then the 7th, because it doesn't have anything, we know that means to play a dominant 7th. So when we're building, say, a C7, C dominant 7, what we get is C, E, G, and B flat. So it's this chord. And that's what we went over in the last video. Well, look at the similarity between C dominant 7 and C minor 7. The only difference is the E. The second note, the middle note of the triad, has been dropped by a half step. And otherwise it's the same. So, another way to think of a C minor 7 is it's like a C dominant 7 with a minor third. Remember that the symbology is C7 When you see that, it means play a C major understood with the dominant 7. The dominant is understood on top. when you're doing a C minor 7, you could say play a C minor, that's what the M applies to, with a dominant 7 on top, because it doesn't say what kind of 7, and you've already used up the M with the C. It means a dominant 7, because if it doesn't specify, that's understood. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're playing a C minor with that 7th note from the dominant chord on top. The other way, if you want to think of it as a minor 7th on top, then you kind of have to add something that isn't there. You have to say play a C minor with a minor 7th on top, which is really a C minor minor 7 is how it should be written, if you think of it that way. So it's not a big deal if you don't have any trouble remembering it. Whichever works for you, it doesn't really matter. If you're looking at a lead sheet and you see something like a minor 7th chord, you just have to remember that you're playing a minor triad and a flatted 7th on top. Now, because we're getting advanced here, I'd like to build some of these for you, just to be clear what's going on and how you could build them yourself. I think probably the easiest way to think of it is a minor triad with a flatted 7th on top. So for example, let's say we saw a D minor 7 in a lead sheet. Well, you could start with, how do I build a D minor? And then I'll add the flatted 7th. Okay, well, a D minor is a D major with the middle note dropped a half step. And when you figure out D major, if you'll remember, one way to do that is to start with D and then count up 4 half steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that takes you to F sharp, and then count up 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3, that takes you to A. And so a D major triad is D, F sharp, and A, sounds like this. Then, to create a minor, we just drop the middle note a half step. That makes it D, F, and A, F natural, and so it looks and sounds like this. Now, all we have to do is add that flatted 7th on top, and we have the minor 7th. So, what is the 7th note of a D scale? Well, it's a half step below the D, so it's C sharp. But we want the flatted 7th of the scale, so we just drop it one more step. That is, we're just going to make it a whole step below the D, so that makes it C natural. So a D minor 7th is D, F natural, A, and C. And sounds like this. Okay, same procedure. Let's say we saw an E minor 7 in a song. Okay, how do we do that? We build the E major in the way that I said. We start with E and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, and we end up with E, G sharp, and B. Then we drop the middle note a half step, so now we have E, G, and B. Then we want to add the flatted 7th on top, so we just go up 1 octave and come down 1 whole step, because the 7th note would be D sharp, so we just drop it to D natural. And E minor 7 is E, G, B, and D. Sounds like this. Okay, F. Let's say we saw an F minor 7 in a lead sheet. So we would play an F major, we go F, A, C in the way that I just described. We'd drop the middle note a half step, so it would be F, A flat, and C. Then we'd go up to our octave and come down a whole step, which is E to E flat. And so we have F, A flat, C, and E flat. And it sounds like that. Okay, what about a G minor 7? Okay, play a G major, it's G, B, D. Drop the middle note a half step, it's G, B flat, and D. Go up an octave to the G and come down a whole step to F natural, and you have G, B flat, D, and F natural. It sounds like this. How about an A minor 7? You see an A minor 7 in a lead sheet. Well, play A major, which is A, C sharp, and E. Drop that middle note a half step to get the minor, so you're going to have A, C, and E. Go up to A, come down a whole step to G, and you've got A, C, E, and G. Sounds like this. What about B? Okay, if you saw a B minor 7 in a song, you'd play a B major, which is B, D sharp, and F. Drop the middle note a half step, so you get B, D natural, and F. Now you've got B minor. Then to add the flatted 7th, you go up to B and come down 1 whole step to A, and that's it. You've got a B minor 7. It's B, D, F sharp, and A. Sounds like this. As for inversions, it's the same rules as always. Because this is a 4-note chord, there will be 4 different ways to play it. As always, we'll just do C minor 7, and then you can extrapolate from there. A C minor 7 is C, E flat, G, and B flat. It's this. So if you want to invert it, move it up from the root position, say, to the first inversion, you'd put E flat on the bottom. So you'd play E flat, G, B, and C. You put the C on top. And that would be the first inversion. Then the second one, you'd start with G, and you'd go G, B flat, C, and E flat. That would be the second inversion. The third inversion is the last one. You start with B flat, then you put C, then E flat, and then G on top. Sounds like that.